So we're out here on Dartmoor National Park, and the reason Dartmoor National Park is the way it is thanks to all the huge number of people, groups and organisations that help maintain the integrity of the National Park. And I'm very pleased today to be joined by Tom and Kelly from Dartmoor Preservation Association. Thank you very much for joining me today.
To be here.
What can you tell me about the DPA? What sort of work do you do? What's your mission?
So the DPA's got quite a long history, which we'll be delighted to talk to you about later, but really we're the largest and oldest membership organisation that helps to look after Dartmoor. We've got a particular interest in archaeology, but also ecology, and we run our own land on the moor. We've had different roles over the years, but right now we act as what's called the critical friend to the National Park. Right. We do some planning vigilance to stop inappropriate development on the moor. We advocate for public access. Recently that means backpack camping, but also the rights of graziers. And we manage our own land for conservation and ecology.
So you've got quite a wide remit, I guess.
Yeah, normally it's one big thing at a time, but overall, it's quite wide. And there's the constant work of having to manage and maintain our land and do the other volunteering processes that we do.
So I'd imagine having such a wide remit, you have a lot of staff, or?
Well, there's three of us, and two of us are here right now.
Right, okay then. I hope things haven't shut down back at Princetown then.
No, it's not a huge staff, but we've got a really dedicated and long-served group of volunteers. Right. We've got a fantastically dedicated trustee board who are very involved operationally when we need them to be, very supportive about how we use our money for the benefit of the moor and how we develop our volunteers and stuff.
It's very much driven by the community with similar people with levels of passion. Yeah,
I mean, we have members from actually all over the world, all over the country. A lot of them around here, around the moor. Most of our trustees are from the moor, from Devon, but we are, we're a broad kirk and we're very welcoming, I hope, to as many people as possible.
And you're always looking for more people, I guess, to join and help out. But you've got a number of projects on the go, and I think, where are we today then?
So right now we're on Buckland Common, which is not one of our own pieces of land, but it is somewhere where our volunteers and the DPA have been working for several years on a specific project, which has had wonderful effects, which I'd love to tell you about. So we're at Buckland Common, which is a very large landscape with a very ancient history. So Neolithic, Bronze Age, medieval and everything in between, like so many parts of the moor. And the reason I brought you here is that this is a great example of the type of project we do. So this isn't one of our bits of land. This actually was a project started by the National Park, and they needed a little bit of financial support, which we gave them, and a lot of volunteer and effort support. And when they first proposed this project, this whole area, which is covered, as you've seen, in some fascinating archaeological remains, reeve systems, retaining walls for livestock, thousands of years old, was completely covered in head-high bracken and in other invasive species, and you couldn't see it. We say it's invasive in as much as it needs to be kept off the archaeology in order to both protect the archaeology, but also to see what's there, for people's enjoyment and education. So it was everywhere on this site, head height, and over about 4 or 5 years, our team of volunteers in all weathers were out here cutting, raking back, clearing off the archaeology first, and then moving out to clear the whole area you can see here. The repeated application of that work has meant that the bracken and other invasive species haven't come back.
So just this area here, how big an area did the volunteers clear?
The whole thing is about 4 hectares, so it's pretty big.
That's a significant amount of work then, isn't it?
It is, given that you've got to cut it, you've got to remove it, and they've got to keep coming back and doing it. It's a hot sunny day today. That brings its own.
You'll think it's probably quite nice to be.
Well,
it's hard,
if you work for a couple of hours in this, you get a sweat on. But the other end of the spectrum, it's freezing cold and blowy in winter, and they're still out here doing that work.
It doesn't even have to be winter, does it? Dartmoor, does it?
So there's a real dedication by people over many years. And what you can see here is the result of that, which is that we can now see these beautiful hut circles, we can see the enclosure walls, we can see the reeve systems that run away and that run off from the huts. And the effect that's had is that by clearing the cover, it does allow grazing animals, both wild horses but also farmed cows, to get in here and sort of to be a lawnmower, if you like, to keep the species off the archaeology and to keep the grass low so it can be seen. And the reason that's important is that this is an ancient landscape, and we need people to understand that. It's important to us. It's the type of work that only volunteers can do, and we have some wonderful volunteers. We've been able to provide a little bit of financial support. And it's a partnership arrangement. So it's a partnership with the National Park, it's a partnership with us, and really to our volunteers. And what that has meant was that people can come here and not only see this astonishing view, which takes in so much of the moor, but also appreciate that there is a really ancient landscape here, and it's really everywhere. Dartmoor is sort of per acre, one of the richest archaeological areas anywhere in Europe that is undeveloped.
It's more than just hills and tors and lovely views, isn't it? There's a lot of history here, isn't there? And I think the work that your volunteers do, I guess, allows that to be exposed and maintained for everyone to enjoy.
Exactly that, and other groups. And we work with many people, but you're right. Dartmoor is essentially a human landscape. It has been altered pretty much since the end of the last ice age, particularly in the last couple of thousand years, and that has all become part of its story and its history, and that's what makes it look the way it is now, including grazing by livestock.
So and grazing happens on this bit of land, and where you've done the clearing and you've got the bracken here. That's a kind of natural barrier, is it?
So exactly that. In due course, it may well sort of re-infiltrate, ingress back in. So it's an effort that needs to be kept up. But as with so many things, the hardest bit is the first effort, and once it's done, it can be maintained. But yes, this morning I was down here. There were wild ponies. There were cows. The whole thing was
lovely,
idyllic.
Idyllic. So I believe, and one of the things you just said there is we've got some prehistoric items to look at as a result of the clearing. Should we go and have a look at those as well?
Yeah, by all means. Yes, to see some hut circles.
Nice bit of history there. So Tom, this looks rather interesting. And what have we got here then?
So what you've got is the remains of a Bronze Age hut circle, of which there are several in this area, and then many groupings of them all over the moor. And what you're looking at here is what would have been the base wall. It would have been about 1.5 meters tall, maybe a bit smaller, and then covered over either with thatch or turf. And that's where a whole group of families would have lived. And you may not be able to see, but maybe you can look later. You can see that around the edge of it, there's a large retaining wall, or the remains of one. You would have had a hut circle where the family would have lived, and then their own kind of home animal range, if you like, for safety. And then the animals would have been out on the moor. And people tended to live in sort of communities. So there's 5 or 6, well, at least 9 of them here. Several more that we probably haven't even identified going off that way towards Rippentor, and they're all over the moor. And what you're seeing there is that in that ton of time, which is anywhere from sort of about 3,500 years ago, is that the moor would really have been a really busy, an interesting, busy place full of families, full of life, and a whole community of people living their lives here, as they have done all the way through to the present day.
That's fascinating. And you didn't actually know this was here until you started to clear the line? Or did you have an idea, maybe?
So the National Park understood that these bigger features were here, definitely, because that you can see them from the air, and you can find them as you walk along. But the danger is the bracken and other invasive species were simply getting in the way of being able to see them, to understand them in their broader context, and definitely features such as some of the reeves and some of the smaller walls were being lost to the bracken and other things.
It's interesting that you say that this would have been quite a busy place, Dartmoor, because I always imagine when I've come across these things, I think, it's a bunch of people living in quite a remote, quite harsh conditions, but maybe that's not the case. There would have been bigger communities.
Well, when I use busy advisedly. It's if you look around you now,
it's not Newton Abbot Town Centre.
Well, exactly, and it's not super busy today.
No.
But nor was it an empty wasteland. It never has been that. It's always been environmentally rich. It's always been an environment for humans. And in fact, if you look across Europe more broadly, Bronze Age Europe was in fact a very sort of bustling place. It may not have had, there's no Paris or Rome, as you say, no Newton Abbots, but there were trade, there was transcontinental trade, there was transcontinental movement of animals, there was the movement of ideas, and Dartmoor and Devon and the UK were very much part of that trans-European Bronze Age culture.
So there's lots of these sites all across Dartmoor, isn't there? There's some of the bigger, smaller ones. There's quite a variety.
They're all over the moor. This is one of the better preserved ones, which is why this entire common area is a premier archaeological landscape and managed so carefully by the National Park. But one thing you get on Dartmoor is, because of the relative lack of development, although there has been consistent use over many thousands of years, so much of this archaeological heritage, be it medieval or industrial revolution or tin mining or Bronze Age or anything like that, is all here side by side. So it's a fantastic kind of capsule history of the history of the UK and this area.
And I guess you and your volunteers help maintain these areas so people can come and have a look at them for themselves.
Yeah, this is really testament to two things: to partnership working with the National Park and others, and to the hard work of the volunteers. And this has been a success for the DPA volunteers, who have come year in, year out, whilst we've been funding the project, and I've got to say, after we stopped funding the project. So this is a sort of labour of love for many people, and it's been really successful. They have done something that is of value to the moor, that people can come and see. It's useful for education. You get to see this fantastic view that you would otherwise not have. And it's really been a labour of love for them.
Kelly, thank you for joining me. I believe you're the kind of the historian of the DPA. What can you tell me about the history of the DPA?
Well, we were formed at a very interesting point in history. It was in 1893, so we are at the height of industrialisation, but also really seeing the effects of the Enclosures Act, which happened over the 18th and 19th centuries. And that really was about tenement farmers who had the rights of commoners to farm lands such as Dartmoor were being told to leave. These lands were being enclosed for productivity of the landowner. And many of the people at this point ended up fleeing to the cities to pursue factory work there. So you see a mass exodus of agricultural areas over this time.
I guess the problem with when people leave a land is the land often dies, and you need the people here to make a land thrive, don't you?
Yes, and for these people, it's very much part of their heritage. It's the only thing that they know, and it's very much part of Devon culture, and our heritage is the rights of commoners and common farming. And yes, absolutely, the land was a lot different, and it's a mass social upheaval at this time. We became a force for advocating for the rights of the common man at this point, basically. And ensuring these people can stay. So we started campaigning in the 90s on behalf of specific plaintiffs and people asking for our help, and also looking at the natural. It's also a time of the Romantics, remember? So it was very much a time of looking at this beautiful land that's coming out in all of popular culture at the time and thinking, wow, this land is our land. So it was a time for protecting this precious thing and the rights of the people that live in it and that their livelihood depends on it.
What other things have you done over the last 100 years in any big campaigns? And
yes, the last 100 years has been a huge period of change for everywhere, and Dartmoor is no different. So World War I happened, and after World War I, the Forestry Commission was founded in 1919, which looked to plant a lot of conifers everywhere across Dartmoor. And as much as we are very pro planting trees, it's got to be the best. It's got to be the right tree in the right place. And we worked very, very hard to campaign against inappropriate developments, even such as afforestation. That was probably one of our first tasks in the 20th century. And then loads of reservoirs started being built, which again, very useful for towns and cities, but you've got to look at the landscape and how it's going to affect the archaeology, the ecology. And then as the 20th century has kind of gone along, we've seen other issues such as World War II meant that military expansion on Dartmoor happened, which then led us to look at ways in which it was maybe being misused, maybe being unsafe. And we published quite a few pieces of literature around the time about different shells and live fire that's been left on Dartmoor and what it means for people who are trying to access it. So we've had environmentalists, we've had access campaigners, we've had everybody sort of working towards all of these different aims, and it really is a massive. I mean,
access is an important thing, particularly with the military, because they've got very large areas of Dartmoor for those military zones. And imagine if the DPA hadn't campaigned against, or losing those access rights, the large parts of the moor would still be probably out of bounds, wouldn't they?
Absolutely, and I think that this is the way in which our charity now has this strength in the fact that we have these open channels of communication and are really well respected.
Well, what are the current challenges, and how is the DPA sort of changing its way and using social media to kind of not just stay relevant, but stay engaged?
I think since the evolution of social media especially, you have a lot more questions and a lot more queries and issues coming up about how we treat Dartmoor and how we access it. And I think that's a very important role to play, and it's good. This is where the reactive side comes into issues, because there are questions falling into our inbox constantly, and it's about educating people on the appropriate use of the moor whilst retaining those rights. That's really important to us.
So I guess while the DPA has changed and grown over the years, kind of its core mission statement and its future kind of remains the same, with having Dartmoor as its heart.
Absolutely, yes. Dartmoor is our heart, and we want to protect the past, and we also want to retain it for the future. So we're now looking at possible education opportunities and engaging more young people, and looking at how we can really help combine the sort of past of our charity and the future of Dartmoor.
Well, here's to another 140 years at least anyway.
Absolutely.
Thanks very much, Kelly.
Thank you.
Now, it's been really interesting talking to you and Kelly and looking at all the projects that you get involved in and all the great work that you've been doing. But you don't do that all on your own, do you?
No, and increasingly we find that partnership working is absolutely critical. In fact, we would prefer to work in a partnership environment. Quite often that's with the National Park, which, as you can imagine, is a huge sort of partner here on the moor, obviously. But there's loads of other wonderful organisations and groups, some with specific interests that we'd like to work with. And recently we've been working with wonderful groups like the South West Peatland Partnership, looking to restore peatland on the moor with something called our Buckland Commons, which helps support common farmers, so people who farm the common land in uphill situations. The Hill Farming Project, similar kind of thing. And we've recently both got involved with and started funding a youth engagement ranger in concert with the National Park, whose job is really to go out to people who live near the moor but haven't got the opportunity to access it. So facilitating access for people who wouldn't otherwise do it. We're looking to get our More Boots programme going again this year, which is where we provide outdoor equipment to underprivileged children so they could access the moor. So it's not just about us funding things, which we do, it's our partnership working that really makes us, gel and effective on the moor. And the reason for that is so many of those other organisations' interests overcross with ours, because we're not looking to preserve the moor like some kind of museum. We're not to set in an aspect just for us. What we want is to preserve the bits of the moor really for future generations. Things that we have been lucky enough to receive from people who preserved them in the past and then hand them on to our children and grandchildren. So preservation is really about the future.
Yeah, because Dartmoor's a living, growing, changing environment, and it's important to protect some of the historical stuff, but also move with the times and get that greater engagement and get more people out here enjoying this place.
Yeah, there's a kind of three-way tension. You're right, it's a living, working environment, and there are many thousands of people who make their livelihoods off the moor, and we mustn't ever forget that. It's also an incredibly important historical environment, so we need to keep that so that we can understand that and people can appreciate it in the future. But also, as you say, some of the threats, if you like, you talk about climate change and things of that nature, a lot of the current debates about biodiversity and rewilding. As Kelly mentioned earlier, so many of the things that affect the moor are changing, and we need to kind of move with them and preserve what is really important whilst flexible enough to be ready for the future.
So obviously we've talked about volunteers. So how can people get involved with the DPA, and what sort of people are you looking for?
We're looking for everyone and anyone, and they don't just have to come from Dartmoor or Devon. They can come from anywhere. We are open to all. Of course, join. You're very welcome to join. We have volunteer opportunities both to do work on our own land management, but also things like we saw at Buckland, to clear archaeology and support the national park. They can donate, of course. We have individual projects such as our backpack camping fundraiser, which we're running right now. And there's always little things to do in the office. So there's many ways to get involved, but please join as a member. Come and help us on volunteering days. Everyone is welcome.
So there's plenty for people to do. There's always work to be done, isn't there?
There's always work to be done.
Well, Tom and Kelly, thank you so much for your time. I've really appreciated it, and it's been really interesting. Thank you.
Us too. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Cheers.
Julian.